The last time anyone saw the two sisters, they were walking side by side toward the creek with tin pails swinging lightly from their hands. The late-day sun hung low over the Kansas prairie, throwing long shadows that stretched across the open grassland like dark fingers. The Bishop Ranch sat behind them, a lonely wooden structure surrounded by miles of wind-bent grass, its windows glowing faintly as supper cooked on the stove. The summer of 1871 had worn down the family, and the two hired girls, 16-year-old Isabel and 14-year-old Susanna, had become essential for keeping the household running. Fetching water before nightfall was a chore they had done countless times. Elias, one of the ranch hands, paused his fence repair when he saw them walking down the familiar path. Their bonnets shielded their faces from the sun, and their skirts brushed softly against the tall grass as they talked quietly, too far away for him to hear the words. They disappeared behind the gentle rise that marked the edge of the creek, and the moment felt so ordinary that Elias didn't think of them again for nearly half an hour. The ranch dogs were the first to sense something wrong. They sprinted toward the creek with sharp, insistent barking that cut through the quiet evening. Elias looked up, expecting to see the sisters returning. The path remained empty. He kept working at the fence for another minute, then wiped the sweat from his brow and scanned the horizon again. Still nothing. Inside the house, Mrs. Bishop began pacing the kitchen. She glanced out the window, noticed the missing pails, and asked her eldest son, Thomas, to go check on the girls. He grabbed his hat and trotted down the path, calling their names as he went. His voice traveled far across the open land, but the only reply was the constant whisper of wind through grass. Thomas reached the creek and saw the first sign that something was wrong. One of the pails lay on its side near the bank, water still pooled around it as though it had been dropped only moments earlier. He scanned the area, his heartbeat picking up. When he climbed the small rise beyond the creek bed, he froze. Two bonnets lay in the tall grass, one white, one faded blue, crushed into the earth as though pressed there by hurried hands. The grass around them was disturbed in uneven patches. Some areas were flattened, others twisted. It didn't look like a struggle, yet it didn't look natural either. The other pail lay a few feet away, its handle bent slightly, the metal smudged with dirt, but not damaged. Thomas's shout brought Elias running. Soon Mr. Bishop, two neighboring ranchers, and Mrs. Bishop herself arrived, skirts rustling as she hurried across the uneven ground. She knelt beside the bonnets, fingers trembling as she lifted one. There were no tears in the fabric, no blood, no signs of dragging. Just a bonnet lying where no bonnet should be. The men spread out immediately, calling the girls' names with increasing urgency. The creek was shallow enough that a person could walk across it without wetting their hem. There were no steep banks, no deep holes where someone might have stumbled. The ground on both sides showed signs of trampling, but the tracks were faint and inconsistent, already fading under the restless prairie wind. By the time the sun slid below the horizon, riders from nearby homesteads had arrived, forming a search party that stretched across the pasture like a living net. Lanterns bobbed through the darkness. Men rode in widening circles, checking ravines, gopher mounds, and old wagon ruts. The dogs sniffed the ground hurriedly, but after a few frantic minutes, they circled aimlessly, unable to follow any scent that made sense. The open prairie swallowed sound and light with equal ease. The night grew colder. Mrs. Bishop sat on the porch, hands clasped tight, staring toward the creek as if sheer willpower might bring the girls walking back up the slope. No one slept. The ranch house filled with murmured theories and worried silences. Some suggested the girls had wandered off chasing something in the grass. Others whispered a word nobody wanted to say aloud. Indians. But the signs didn't point to that. There were no horse tracks, no moccasin prints, no arrowheads, nothing taken from the ranch. And the area had seen no raids that year. The prairie around Bishop Ranch was open for miles. Anyone approaching would have been visible against the horizon long before reaching the creek. At dawn, the search expanded. Men rode until their horses sweated and their shirts stuck to their backs. They checked every dry wash and every stretch of tall grass. They shouted until their voices cracked. Not one fabric scrap, one footprint, or one broken twig gave them direction. The land was too open, too flat, too exposed. A person could see a rider approaching from half a mile away. So how could two girls vanish without even a scream? As the second day dragged on, theories hardened into fear. Some believed the girls had encountered a passing wagon and been forced inside. Travelers sometimes crossed this area without stopping at ranch houses. A wagon could have passed by the creek unseen from the Bishop home, taking the girls east or west before nightfall, but no one in the surrounding settlements reported seeing such a wagon. Others insisted it had to be an outlaw or drifter, someone hiding near the creek, waiting for an opportunity. But why take two girls and leave everything? Their bonnets, their pails, their shoes, behind in the grass? Mr. Bishop organized another search on the third day, sending men farther than before. They followed the creek for miles, checking both banks for any sign the girls had walked or been carried. They found nothing. The water was slow and shallow, barely enough to cover a man's ankles. If the girls had stumbled in, they would have been found. As the days slipped into weeks, the story spread across Kansas. Newspapers printed short paragraphs about two hired sisters lost on the prairie. Travelers repeated the tale at trading posts and campfires. The details changed in some accounts, different ages, different names, but one part stayed consistent. The girls went to fetch water and never returned. The bonnets remained in the Bishop house, stored carefully in a small wooden chest. Mrs. Bishop kept them as the last physical link to the girls who had lived under her roof for just one summer, but had left a wound the prairie could never heal. The land eventually grew quiet again. Grass rose where it had been pressed down. The creek continued its slow, steady path. The path to the water remained, worn into the earth by years of footsteps, but no one walked it without looking over their shoulder. The mystery of the Bishop Ranch girls became one of those stories the frontier never solved. Too many miles, too much open land, and too few answers. Two sisters stepped into the Kansas wind with metal pails and simple intentions. Somewhere between the house and the creek, the plains erased them. Their disappearance remains one of the oldest unsolved cases from early Kansas settlement, a reminder of how quickly the frontier could swallow a person whole, and how sometimes, even in broad daylight, the land gave nothing back. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.